Okay, he's recording. All right, so the first thing we normally show here is open forum. I had one little thing. I'm going to do a quick share here. And I'm going to share. Let's see, did I leave that open or do I have to reopen everything? Hang on a second. I got to reopen it. Okay, that's what I want right there. And let's take that down size-wise. Okay. Now let's see if I can do a share. Okay. So I was mentioning earlier, before the meeting really got going, that my wife was in the middle of a Zoom session, and even though I have my router and cable modem on a UPS, and I have a second UPS to handle some of the camera backups, and my laptop was unaffected, the B-Link happened to bounce partially. It was a click blip. Didn't really knock it off. Froze Zoom, and ended up having to be rebooted because it was unresponsive. So rebooted, came back up, but I had no Wi-Fi. And not even no Wi-Fi, but I didn't even have my devices show up in the device manager. This is the device manager after I was able to fix it. But the Bluetooth and the Intel Wi-Fi were missing. All I had was the WAN and the Realtek PCI controller. Everything else is gone, and it wasn't even in any other devices. It just disappeared from the configuration. So I looked around and tried to figure out, okay, what can I do to bring this back? And I did a couple power cycles, and it still didn't come back. And then I saw something that, okay, if you go into network and advanced network settings and there's a thing called network reset. Because sometimes Windows 11 on the fast boot will hold the Wi-Fi card hostage. So as a result, I did this reset, and then all of a sudden Wi-Fi. But it was kind of bizarre because even when I would go to the system tray where you normally can see your Ethernet and you can see Bluetooth and airplane mode, that was all gone. Those three little icons were not on that pop-up display at all. Like, okay, this is bizarre. But the network reset does seem to help in those cases. So you may want to write it down if your machine all of a sudden disappears your Wi-Fi adapter.
Good tip.
Yeah, that one worked out well. I mean, I did the reset and rebooted and came right back up. It was also in the middle of doing a Windows update. Like the Windows update had completed and was waited to reboot. So that may have been partial to blame as well, because I had done this update before, and then, okay, I didn't think I needed to reset right before her Zoom session, but.
I don't know if it would have worked, but in Device Manager, there's an option to tell it to scan for device changes.
Oh, I rescanned and it still didn't show up. Scan for hardware changes. It wasn't there. It was still gone. And I thought, this is really weird. I thought maybe it had a hardware, like an actual device failure, and pulled itself out of the configuration for that. Like am I going to have to open this thing up, find it on the whatever inside the B-Link and reseat it? But okay, take it out, reboot, put it back in, reboot, and then sometimes they come back like that. But the network reset was able to bring it back.
Mm.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bob.
That is something that people should know about fast startup if it is enabled. This is going back all the way to Windows 10. The computer, and especially certain types of hardware, don't shut down during that kind of a shutdown. You actually have to hit your physical power switch to make it happen on your computer. Those devices tend to be USB interfaces. They keep going. One reason is USB is sometimes used for charging in mobile devices. And also network cards because of Wake on LAN. So this is not unexpected behavior. However, the particular glitch that you got into of course, was that there had been some kind of a power issue and things came back in an unstable state. So that could also have involved your network equipment outside of the computer.
But it actually, well, like I said, my network, the router and the cable modem stayed up. They were fine because they're on UPS. And the V-Link actually did not automatically reboot all the way. It was like it was a brownout. We went down to 66 volts. But I had reset it, power cycled it with the button twice, and then even unplugged it and restarted it, and it was still gone. Didn't come back until I did the network reset. So I did a cold start on this thing, expecting it to come back, and it still didn't come back, and that had me a little bit concerned.
On my primary computer net, I've had over the last couple of years occasions where nothing worked until I did a network reset.
Similar type of thing where the you don't see the drivers and they don't appear anywheres. And I still have a couple drivers on that machine that are mystery. I mean, they're something root 0001 and 0000, and there's no hardware ID, so I have no idea what it was, and it may have been deleted last year in March, but I didn't go anywhere any further on it. Probably was something left over from the prior Win 11 release that was on there before it moved to 25H2. Yeah. Could have been something from there. So, okay. Any other things in open forum? Or quiet here, huh?
Yeah, nobody's got some issues.
They're doing fine. I do have another thing that I will present as well. It has to do with things that I've seen on other people's machines as well. Okay, Donna. Okay. One thing would be, has anybody else noticed OneDrive trying to hold your files hostage? Where all of a sudden all your files start disappearing off of your machine and they appear on the OneDrive partition instead.
Yep, that is a thing that they've been doing for the past couple of months. There's an increasing pressure to go cloud first with data storage and primary data storage.
Yeah, they're really pushing OneDrive, period, and not saving any of your local hard drive.
Yeah.
Oh, let's see. Where's the chat? Okay, let's see if I have this.
Now, I take extraordinary steps to keep my accounts local and to keep my storage local, so I don't run into this.
Yeah.
But I do run into having to run things even through PowerShell sometimes in order to maintain my autonomy.
Yeah. Another thing that you can do is disable the OneDrive software from Microsoft and use a third-party tool to mount the OneDrive as a folder or a drive letter and use it that way rather than have the Microsoft software screwing around with your files.
Okay, I did post something that had been posted to the Ask Woody free into the chat, and I can share this as well if it will show up for me. All right, let me do this and flip over to the other tab. Okay, basically, this is how they have a way to do this. I've done something similar to this, except I didn't do the registry settings that are mentioned here for it to happen. But you can go into, it can be real simple. You download a file, and then all of a sudden it says you get typically you get the message, oh, you need to back this up. Click here to back it up on OneDrive. The minute you click on that, it starts doing it changes your OneDrive settings and starts copying things for you. Although OneDrive is not truly a backup. Okay, it's
Yep.
actually a copy only. It is not termed an actual backup. Even though I do have Macrium Reflect backups on this, it still keeps on and saying, "Oh, you haven't backed up your computer." Yes, I have. I did a full backup in 35 minutes yesterday. Yes. So why do you think I don't need another backup that you're going to provide? Anyhow, it typically will take all of your files on the desktop in your documents folder and your pictures folders. It will never touch the things in download. So it will avoid. So if you really want to keep stuff that can never find its way to OneDrive, keep it in download or a link or a folder off of download. But the problem is sometimes the final cleanup modules will want to clean up files in downloads, which would get rid of some of those. So not a good idea if you're going to do this regularly, but I will keep files that I want to for reinstalling, like drivers and other utilities in the downloads directory until I back them up to another medium, and then have them available anytime I need to reinstall them there.
Mm-hmm.
But what you can do is download them back. So you go into your OneDrive settings, you go into your additional sync and backup, and then there's an additional thing you click on to get down to this thing on the bottom. Download all files, and it will bring them all back. And you also make sure that you've turned off all of your synchronizations. So there's other settings here. These folders, these all get turned on. Documents, pictures, desktop, music, videos. You turn them all off again, and then you can download all your files back, and hopefully it will stop doing this for a while. You can manually go and check and see if there's anything that else was still up on the OneDrive and drag it back to a local hard drive. But so that's what this part of the settings say, how to bring back your files. And there's still sometimes I've seen where the files have not all shown up, and I've had to go back and manually copy and paste them. Then they want you to go ahead and turn off OneDrive for settings, and this is actually going into Policy Editor to be able to go in and make sure that it can't do this. So you can use, if you have Windows 11 Pro, you have Group Policy Editor. If not, you may be able to do it with Registry Editor if you have Windows 11 Home. That's one of the reasons that you always should have a Pro versus Home account on your operating system. But this is more on how to do it with the Group Policy Editor or with Registry Editor. And like I said, I've put this link into the chat so you can download it. It's on the Ask Woody free, so it does not require you to log in or have a paid subscription on Ask Woody. So that's one thing that I've seen that some of the people I've had to support their machines with, helping them migrate from Windows 10 to Windows 11, and then all of their stuff started disappearing, even to the point where he'd be reading his email in Yahoo, save an attachment, and it would disappear before he could go and look at it out of Yahoo. But
for some people it got even worse because their OneDrive by allocation filled up.
Yes, if it gets over 5 gigs, yes.
They lost data during these upgrades.
Yeah, that's the sad thing about this, is that if you have a Outlook, if you have a 365 subscription, you automatically have a terabyte in your OneDrive. But if you don't, and you're relying on the free copies or whatever, minimal use of Office utilities, you have to be much more concerned about this. Hopefully, Microsoft will make a OneDrive optional version rather than pushing it as hard as they have.
Well, there's another thing about the OneDrive. If you exceed the 5 gigabytes, you can still buy cheaply 100 gigabytes additional storage. There used to be also other increments like 200 gigabyte and some other ones before the 1 terabyte. Now they don't have that. After 100, you have to go to the terabyte, at which time they give you the MS365
Yes.
basically as an additional free service, so to speak.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's Microsoft's way of sticking it to you.
Well, most of the people that I have where they needed a copy of Microsoft Office, rather than trying to find a version of Office that didn't go obsolete on them, I just said, here, if you pay for a Microsoft 365 and don't go for the Copilot, if you can go for the Classic, you'll save a little money as well. Because most of the machines that they're running really can't do too much in terms of AI, not locally anyway. And are they going to be needing it? Usually not. So they just want their copy of Microsoft Word and Excel and maybe PowerPoint, and they're perfectly happy.
Yep.
And like I say, I've been engaged in an ongoing journey to get all of this stuff off all of my Windows computers, and I not have to be bothered by it. And there are places that have scripts for this. I would not recommend a script because it'll try to do things that may or may not work any longer, and you could get really messed up. So one of these sites lists the registry changes they make, and they have .reg files. And when you run their .reg files, in the process of doing that, it's a tiny little script. It creates the .reg file that will reverse whatever you're doing.
Oh,
And
that's nice.
I forget what site it is. I have notes on it somewhere, but probably not on this PC right here.
Uh-huh.
But I did have some notes on getting rid of the AI and some of this OneDrive dependency in Windows and some of the Windows apps. And there's definitely some popular scripts, but this one is the less popular of the two most popular ones.
Yeah.
And it's at GitHub.
Okay, that's nice. I think I showed last month on how to get rid of some of the Google extensions that automatically showed up taking up room in your Google Cache and storage on your local machine. It had created a 4 gigabyte file called weights.bin. And if you disable the local AI capabilities in Google settings, then they'll delete that file. But if you're on a size machine, you only have 256K SSD, like some of these machines ship. It's kind of ridiculous that they make them that small, but they do.
What I have done in my machines is for both Chrome and Firefox, there are flags or about config items, and there's probably 37 of them that you can set that deal with AI.
Yeah.
And the one unified switch in Firefox doesn't cover all these cases. And in Chromium, good luck finding a switch.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I can get rid of that. Okay. And I can get rid of that. Okay, good. All right. Anything else that somebody wants to share? Open forum question or an observation? Something you've noticed that stopped working recently? Have you tried using the free VPN in Firefox?
I tested it out, just for a couple of days. I have a question about the backup that you showed on your screen. If Windows backs up your files, using those backup buttons that you have disabled, does it remove the files from your PC and only have them in the cloud?
If you use the OneDrive, it does do that. It does copy them up to OneDrive and deletes them off of your local PC. So it's not really a backup. It's a move me to the cloud function.
Right.
And I don't recommend using OneDrive in that mode. Too many things can get corrupted along the way. See, the bad thing about OneDrive is there's only one copy of this. There's not more than one copy. And with a classic backup, you can have multiple backups on an external server, and you can, go back and see if I'm missing a file. I can go back and recover it. But with OneDrive, there's only one copy of the files. So if worst case, you corrupt or overwrite a file on your machine and you're connected to the network, once OneDrive says that you're not using it anymore, it'll back it up on top of the only copy you have up on the OneDrive, and now it's gone. Okay,
Yeah.
you've lost both copies. So that's why I don't say it's a backup, because it really isn't. It's a way of migrating files, making more room on your machine by putting your files in the cloud. If I wanted to do that, I would use Google Docs. Keep them all up in Google. But I mean, that's the way Google Drive and Google Docs work. But there's a time and a place, and sometimes you don't have a network connection. So you have no access to your files unless you made local copies. And even then, like I said, keeping them into the download will never have OneDrive grab a hold of them. I've had, and for backup, well, like has been recommended here by others, the Macrium Reflect really does what it's supposed to do. Does it quickly, does it efficiently, and it'll re-verify everything you backed up to make sure it's readable. Thank you. There's the debloat.
For backup, I use an open source program called Copia, and it runs in the system tray all the time, and you can tell it how frequently you want it to examine your drive, and it makes what it calls a snapshot, which is I guess it's
differential backup.
You would call it incremental. It's not backing up everything. It's only backing up the bits and bytes on your drives that have changed since the last time it ran the snapshot.
Do you have it backing up to the cloud, or do you have a NAS or an external server?
I have it backing up to a company called Backblaze.
Okay, so it's a type of backup, online backup in the cloud.
Yeah, it's an S3 storage type source system where you only pay for the actual storage that you use. So you don't have to buy a terabyte or 2 terabytes or 3 terabytes of storage, and you're only using 100 gigabytes of it, and you're buying a whole terabyte. With the Backblaze B2 storage, you only pay for what you use. They charge you $6 per terabyte. So if you only have 200 or 300 gigabytes of data, it's like $2.50, $2 a month.
Okay, that's a reasonable option. I use an old QNAP NAS, and for the most part, I leave it in suspend mode almost all the time. It goes to sleep at 2 a.m. and stays there until I will send it a wake-up call, and then it wakes up quicker because it's only suspended. But I will wake it up and then do my backups, and then at 2 a.m. it'll go to sleep. But even when it's running, it only uses about 20 watts. So it's very power efficient, and it's fast. I mean, I couldn't go any faster if I had a local attached SSD. I mean, it's about the same speed, except it's going over gigabit Ethernet, and seems to be very happy when I do a backup or something on it. The only downside on a NAS is every time I wake it up, if it's been asleep for about a month or so, there's new software it wants to download. So it'll say, oh, time for an OS upgrade. Oh, now to update all the apps. So that can take even longer than the backup would normally take. But I'll do the backup first. And then after the backup is done, then I'll go and log on to it and then do its upgrades and then let it go to sleep and be happy again. But you can back up to the cloud. The downside of doing a backup to the cloud is you're limited to the speed of your upload. And not everyone has 500 megabit uploads. Sometimes they're consistently lower than that. If you have one of the older cable modems not provided by Comcast and you don't sign up for gig service, you'll only get maybe 40 megabit per second uploads.
Yeah, I do Macrium Reflect image backups, but I do them locally.
Okay.
My storage that goes online to Backblaze runs once every hour. And if there's nothing for it to do, if I'm not using my computer, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah. Okay.
And if I create a new file, then it backs up that one file. But I don't need a massive upload speed.
Okay. Well, it depends on, like I said, how you do it. And then if you have to recover these things, what do you have to download? Because what in the past, when you would do things like incremental backup and recovery, you'd have to, for a cold metal restore, you'd have to restore the backup, restore all of the incrementals until you got to the last incremental, unless there was a way of downloading only the most recent that you needed and recover the file you wanted.
What I do is I go into the Copia GUI and I go to the time interval that I want to restore the file from, and I can either select one file or select the whole directory. I can mount the file system as a volume.
So he's automatically taking care of some of this for you by looking at all of the things that have been backed up.
Yes.
Does it ever tell you, well, we got 2/3 of it?
No, it's very efficient at doing its backups. It has a deduplication feature, meaning that if you have a file that exists in more than one place, it only backs up one copy.
Okay. Is that spelled with the K? It's spelled with a K, isn't it? Kopia. Yeah.
Yes. And it works on Mac, Linux, and Windows. And it can back up to a local drive. It's a true backup as opposed to a sync.
Okay. All right. Well, I will keep that on my list here. Copia with a K. All right. Any other things that people want to share?
When I did my post to chat, I was muted. So I wanted to let people know that Rayfire is the site where all these .reg files are. RAPHIRE.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, good. All right, where's this thing? Make sure, okay. All right, now they've moved everything around. So you may need to look around to see where they have the save chat again. All right. Yes, it is again. All right, there's a save chat. It's on the 3 dots now in the chat window if you want to do a save chat.
Yeah, but you have to understand, if I do a save right now,
Yes,
any subsequent postings will not be there.
correct. And then when you're done, the whole thing has got to be put up there. So yes.
Usually when you close Zoom, it does that for you. It downloads it.
Yeah, if I've noticed that. All right, let's do this. Good. All right. All right. I will post my presentation for the night up there as well in case anybody needs it before then and has to drop off. Then they can go ahead and get a copy of it. Okay. Let's go to this. Well, I may as well start this. I don't know how long it will take. Probably won't take that long, but I'll go ahead and start this thing on passkeys. I've been meaning to do a presentation on passkeys for a while, and there's been a couple YouTube presenters that I've looked at, and they had a pretty comprehensive presentation. And also some of the problems with passkeys that people don't necessarily recognize. It is a hardware encryption mechanism. It is not a password. It is using public key technology, and it is as secure as you can get right now on your normal machine. However, there still is some legacy access to these things that may allow somebody to get in and obtain your passkeys. So are they completely pure and present? Not always the best, but this is what the presentation will tell you. So this is the new standard. A lot of them are popping up all over the place. Oh, do you want to use a passkey? Do you? And you keep telling it no, but it still keeps on asking you, do you want to use a passkey? Well, a passkey is supposed to be a consumer-friendly, device-bound replacement for passwords. It uses public key cryptography to secure the authentication of the user and the device that's used to access the remote site. And in addition, it also knows what site created the passkey and will not allow the passkey to be used on a different site. It is similar but different from RSA certificates that you normally use for HTTPS access on secure web connections. But they have equivalent amounts of security. The 256-bit passkey is equivalent to a 3072-bit RSA certificate in terms of security and in terms of being able to be cracked. So the most secure type of passkey is the one that's called a device-bound passkey. This isn't what most of the passkeys that are coming through are. They're not device-bound. If you do have device-bound passkeys, they are locked into one machine and one machine only. You won't be able to use that passkey on another machine. If you have two people that need to share an account and they use device-bound passkeys, they each have their own device and their own login and their own passkey stored on their local machine. If it's an Apple device, it's stored in what's called Secure Enclave, which is part of your iCloud keychain. For Windows 11, it stores device-bound passkeys in your TPM, the Trusted Platform Module. And Android use Trusted Execution Environment, and it depends on the version of Android, whether you're 13, 14, or if you're on a Google device. It's got a trusty T that it uses for its trusted execution environment. And again, device-bound passkeys are only stored on the local secure device. For devices that don't have a built-in secure location, you have to have some sort of external secure mechanism to save for storing the private keys. One of these things is called a YubiKey, spelled YUBIKEY. And these are they look like little flash drives that plug in on a port, and they have software that goes along with them and allows them to function pretty much the way a TPM module would. Another type of passkey is one that can be shared among all your devices, and that is called a synced passkey. This is typically what is being used on most of the places that you are asking that are asking you to use a passkey. So the device-bound passkey is not the typical one. The synced passkey is the typical one. And let's say, why are you moving to passkeys? Again, the secure remote site may have your public key, which is 32 to 65 byte, and uses it in the 4-way challenge to accept you into the site. So that's basically more efficient than a password. You still have a username, but you're only storing half of the login credentials. And if there is a breach, then it is not useful to anyone to obtaining the public keys. You can give away your public keys and nobody can do anything with them. So initially, you log into a site with your username. The remote site responds with a series of random numbers to your device. And each time you do this, it's a different set of random numbers. It's not the same ones. The device uses your info to verify it's you, either using your fingerprint or face scan or lock screen code, but it doesn't send any of that to the remote site. So it will then, after it knows it's you here on the machine, it signs the challenge with your private key that it saved in TPM or the TEE or the iCloud keychain. Then the remote site checks to see the challenge received with your public key and then verifies it matches the challenge that it sent. If all that works, then you're logged in. So how this is more secure? Well, part of it is when you did the setup of the passkey, it remembered the domain where it's doing this. And that's part of it when you are setting up your public and private keys for the passkey. So if somebody tries to access and gives you a challenge to Google with a 0, it doesn't match google.com and it won't validate. The remote site only has a public key. If you have a password or an encrypted password on that remote site and it gets compromised, it's only a matter of time and computing before they can break that password. So, and then they have that password, they could get into that site again, or other sites if you use the same password on other sites. So in theory, it is more secure, but a secure system is only as good as its weakest link. So how is passkey more secure? Well, these things called man-in-the-middle attacks, where somebody takes over your modem and or router and captures your traffic. And if they capture the traffic for a login, it won't work because the random challenge is different each time. So they can't use a saved challenge to basically get into a remote site. The compromise of the remote site isn't as useful as you only have half of the key, the public. The passkey is also bound to the original site. So a spoof site can't use it to compromise. So yes, device-bound passkeys are more secure, but that doesn't help you access a remote site if you lose the device. If you lose a device, you've lost access to those sites. And now you're at the whim of however they have a recovery mechanism to let you back in again. And that is where some of the holes show up, is if you lost your passkey and you need to re-access it with some other mechanism. And the synced passkeys on browsers, well, synced passkeys are linked to either your Google Password Manager, your Apple Passwords, or Microsoft Edge. That is this type of passkey, synced passkeys, is the one that's most prevalent in practice. But here's the thing. When you have a recovery mechanism to retrieve your credentials when you've lost them to log into your Google or Edge or Apple, that's the weak link. Because your super secure passkey authentication is protected by a much weaker backdoor. So the paths that fall out are the lost passkey recover. There's a special hell for people with iCloud accounts with iPhones because it's the same device, so there's problems there. And websites that allow you to use old passwords. So here's how compromises of passkeys occur. So you click on the lost password passkey recovery and start a process which might send a link to your phone or to your email or asking you about your security questions to access your account. Now, if some attacker has gained access to your email and phone, either with SIM swap or something like that, they can get into and retrieve your phone messages. They can get into your account with a man-in-the-middle attack. On iCloud accounts, because the iPhone is usually the authentication device as well as the keeper of the iCloud password, it can be used to compromise the iCloud synchronization when it goes to other Apple devices. So that way it can get access to all the device private keys. If the remote site also allows you to use your old passwords to use, well, if somebody has breached and your password has been shared and there's no authenticator app, then they can get into your Google account or whatever, your Edge Microsoft account, and now they have access to your saved information. So, and when you want to, also there's another one, if you happen to want to share your passkeys to like a new device, sometimes they give you a QR code that says, here, add another device to your account. Well, that's a weaker type of security as well to be able to get them to migrate your passkeys to a new device. So how do you protect yourself from some of these things? Okay. One of the things you can do is use much longer passwords. Use a 30-digit password or multiple phrases with hyphens or something to uniquely identify the password. Much harder to break. Using an authenticator program instead of SMS recovery is also preferred. Like when you log into another machine with your Google account, Google will go to your phone and say, hey, somebody's trying to get into your account. Is this you? They'll send you an email, but they'll also have it pop up on your phone. And then your phone, you can say, no, it's not me. It's somebody hacking trying to get in. So that's an authenticator. The Microsoft has an authenticator as well. So there's a presentation that I used to look at to create most of this. I've sent you that link in the presentation. You can click on it, and she goes into a lot more detail on some of these things as well. Final thoughts on passkeys. The TPM is not an infinite resource. So if you are using device-bound passkeys, there's a limit to how many you can store on your machine. Windows has about 100 discoverable credentials typically in a TPM storage. So if you're using BitLocker, if you're using Windows Hello for Business, if you're using smart cards, all of those are going to use up some of those locations as well. However, if you're only using the passkey for the passkey device bound, like for maybe Google account, that could protect some of your other keys that are stored on the synced passkeys. T also has a limit as well, somewhere between 10 and 100 discoverable credentials. The iCloud has no limit because all of its credentials are stored in the cloud. It's in your iCloud keychain. And if you wanted to look and see what a UBI key looks like, here's a couple of them right here. There's like about 30 or 40 different kinds of UBI keys that can be utilized for passkeys. And some of them include near field. Some of them are USB-A, USB-C. Some of them have both. There's a whole bunch of them. You can look at them, and they have different prices, of course, as well. But it has the software plus the storage for the keys. And as long as you don't lose your UBI key, you're fine. But if you lose your UBI key, it's just like a device-bound key. You basically are toast. Okay. That's what I have. Anybody have any questions on passkeys?
Not really a question, but a comment. One thing that your presentation didn't cover that you might want to add to it for future is password managers are now creeping up one more at a time with the ability to store and manage your passkeys. So,
And yeah, there are in that one presentation link, it does mention that. So in my presentation, if you follow that link and watch that YouTube, it's about 26 minutes long. She does go into that. And she does say, I hope you're not still using LastPass because LastPass has been compromised.
yep, I use a KeyPass XC on desktops, and that saves the passkey, and it transfers it to, when I transfer the database over to my Android phone, the Android phone picks up the passkeys as well.
Well, like I said, the one complication on those kinds of things is what is the recovery mechanism for accessing that? Does it use an authenticator app, or is it using a password and or an SMS thing in case you lose your password to that? And that's the breakdown. That's the weak link, is the recovery mechanisms. So this one presentation I saw seemed to identify.
Well, I have on the sites that I use passkeys, I still have the ability to log in with a user ID and password if something were to happen to the passkey. But as you suggested in your presentation, my passwords are on average 40 characters long.
Well, if your passwords are long enough and you feel secure, but keep in mind, if they have a breach, that password can be reverse engineered. It's just a matter of time and processing power. And if you have something that's basically like an AI, it could probably crack it in record time with enough processing power.
I looked up something about YubiKey. The current top of the line ones can hold 100 credentials per key, and the older ones can hold 25. So it's similar to TPM in capacity.
Yeah.
But the advantage is, unlike TPM, you can swap out different YubiKeys.
Yes, you can. And that's what you would have to use if you were a Linux user and you're not using browser bound passkeys. Because there is no TPM module currently in Linux. I don't know if they're planning to put one in. But
wait a minute. Linux does have access to TPM.
Then that's news to some of the presentations I've seen. Because I've gone in and looked for this thing. It says, does Linux support passkeys? Yeah.
Yes, it does. It does.
Okay.
Another thing that about YubiKeys, I have seen some presentations done by people that recommend buying them in pairs and have both pairs registered to each of the accounts you use them on. So one acts as a backup to the other.
Okay. So the one thing that I saw here about Linux, to use that, you need something like a YubiKey or a password manager extension for software like Bitwarden or Brave. They don't have a unified operating system level platform.
That's not true. That's not true.
What platform do they have in Linux?
Linux fully supports and utilizes TPM hardware versions 1.2 and 2.0. The Linux kernel natively manages TPM chips through its built-in cryptographic API, allowing the system to use hardware-backed security to protect data, and then the Gemini AI goes on to illustrate uses to which this is put. These are more recent Linux kernels than many people are familiar with.
Okay, that's probably why, because most of the stuff I have is LTS type of kernels.
LTS really doesn't matter because it's the kernel number that matters.
Well, yeah, I'm not using the most current ones because the hardware won't support the newer ones.
Check again. Some of the newer kernels go back pretty far in hardware support. There are HWE kernels.
Yeah, but I don't have the TPM hardware on these machines either.
No, well, that
Yeah.
would make it a moot point. Unless you use a YubiKey.
Okay, unless you use the YubiKey. If you use the YubiKey, that's a way around it as well. So, yeah.
Right. And their software, the YubiKey software, actually supports what Tim had mentioned. If you buy your keys in pairs, their software allows you to designate a key as a backup key, and it knows how to keep the two of them the same.
Yeah.
So do you have to have both of them plugged into a machine at the same time?
No. One acts as strictly, say, a primary key, and if you lose it or it gets badly damaged, the backup key is there to take its place.
Well, how does the backup key get updated is my question.
First of all, you have to have an online account that will allow you to have two YubiKeys, a primary and a backup.
Okay.
You register both YubiKeys with the accounts you need to access with them. And that's how they become backup to each other.
Okay.
And not all sites, if they allow a YubiKey, have allowance for the backup YubiKey.
Okay. YubiKey backup.
All right, so we've kind of beat passkeys to death.
Hopefully. Well, we still have time. If anybody else wants to bring up any other subjects, we can go ahead and discuss them. Is everybody sitting here with a UPS just in case the storms hit again?
I do happen to have UPSs. They don't have very much here. They have very little capacity.
That's one of the downsides with UPSs. If you need it to run anything with any significant amount of power, it has a very short life. Even backing up a modem and a router and a cable modem, that may only give you about 45 minutes to an hour with a 600 volt amp UPS because of the amount of power that they need. If you have just nothing more than USB supply, I think my Home Assistant on its UPS with the NAS, the total raw is only maybe 10 watts. So I'm probably pretty good on that respect.
Now, if you have a power outage from a storm, your power could be out for a day or two or more. So your UPS battery is really only intended to keep your machine alive long enough so that you can do a safe shutdown of your device.
Well, I've gone beyond that. I have this thing called an old 3,500 watt generator in the garage, and as long as I have gasoline, I can run that thing overnight at least. And with 10 gallons of gas, I can probably go about a day and a half. And I've used that to keep freezers going, some pumps going, the cable modem and the routers and the UPSs. Sometimes the UPSs freak out when they get plugged into a generator. They don't always, they'll beep and they don't like getting plugged into a generator, but they usually will handle it and then they'll stay charged. But I have a
UPS specifically for charging mobile devices, tablets and phones and lamps and flashlights and things. So if we have a hurricane and I have an emergency lantern that runs on a rechargeable battery, after the lantern, I turn it off or the battery runs low, I plug it into this big UPS that I have that doesn't run any appliances or anything. It's just there to recharge my lantern and my phone. things like that.
This is a 24,000 milliampere hour battery backup, which has a solar panel on it, although the solar panel is more gimmick than anything else. And usually about once every 6 months, I will plug it into its adapter and power it up and let it charge fully until the next time I think I might need it. Of course, the time I will actually need to use it, it will have deteriorated considerably, I assume. Right now it says it's at 50%. But
Right.
you can pick up the smaller ones that are actually as efficient. This one is a, let's see, there. You can't see it, but it is, this is a 20,000 milliampere hour,
Right.
20 ampere hour battery pack. And then there's other ones that look like this that actually have a different type of thing. But these typically, I find these at Ollie's and nearby, and it, let's do that. There, good. It's going to show its power. And they, like I said, I can keep several of those charged up and use them to recharge phones as needed when I have to, when we have power outages, if I don't have it plugged into the generator. That's typically what I have to do, but it's just something that you have to remember to do on a regular basis. And if you don't, well, then when you do have a power outage, you're not prepared for it.
Yeah, that's why I use the UPS. It's plugged in all the time.
Yeah, but the problem is with UPSs, and I will remind everyone on UPSs, is when's the last time you changed your battery?
I change them every 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, 3 years is probably the longest you should go if you actually see any of the stuff on your UPS. I typically have the UPSs fail at church every 4 years, and I have to get new batteries for them. So they don't quite last 4 years because we will have, that's a little bit different situation because that's a facility with three-phase power. And typically when we have a power outage, it's only one of the three phases that gets knocked out. But if it's the phase that has the security system on it, well, then the UPS is sitting there running while it fails overnight.
Yeah, I have an extra battery for my UPS that I keep. I charge it up. It's a lead acid battery. It's a big, like a small car battery. And I charge it up and then I unplug it and I let it sit for a while. And I have that. I could put that into anyone. I could use that in my living room or my bedroom. And then if we have a hurricane, we usually have 2, 3, 4 days notice.
Mm-hmm.
Any of my batteries, I have a label on the top of each UPS that tells me when I last replaced it. If I need to, I go to Battery Plus and I just buy a new battery and make sure that I have all fresh batteries in the house before the hurricane hits.
Yeah, my brother used to use, when he was living in Lighthouse Point, he had a 2 kilowatt diesel generator that he ordered from China. And he had the big containers of diesel fuel because it would run a lot longer on diesel than it would gasoline. And there's also a difference in storing diesel fuel versus storing gasoline, a little bit safer when you're saving multiple quantities. But he also would run his stuff off of a pair of 900 ampere hour 900 watt inverters, two 900 watt inverters, and he would use car batteries to supply the source of energy for them. And then he would charge them up with the diesel generator so he could continue to function. but it's a
that's
little
the,
bizarre.
Well,
that's the
I have on my plug-in hybrid, I've got like 10 kilowatt hours of battery that if it's all charged up, and it has a switch that I can turn on and a plug in the back of the car. I can actually plug in 110 into that.
Okay. And that's a way of not having to have the generator, but 10 kilowatt hours is basically not even a tank of gasoline with my generator. Because if I'm running, it's like I said, it's 3,500 watts at full output.
Yeah.
So if I can run it full output for 3 hours, that's 10 kilowatt hours. So yes, you could run things with it. I don't know for how long. Like a refrigerator, depends on the refrigerator. But a refrigerator, freezer, side by side, real efficient, runs between 200 and 400 watts per hour. That's my LG unit, and that's how I can keep track of how much power it needs. Chest freezers, if that are not opened, they can be a little bit more efficient because basically they have the lid on the top and nothing's leaking out. You have to get something out. That will draw another 150 watts on the average per hour.
I have a secret backup plan. I have a neighbor across the street that has one of those gas-powered or natural gas-powered generators for her house. And once every 6 months, I bring her a bottle of wine. And make sure I keep myself in good standings so that if we have a power failure, I can charge my stuff up at her house.
I once had, before I had my gas-powered generator in 1998, we would have a couple of frequent power failures in my neighborhood. I happen to be on Charlie phase now. I used to be on Alpha phase, and I think my neighbor is on Beta. But across the street, she would have power, and we would be out, and I'd go knock on the door and said, "Can I borrow a couple kilowatts here? I need to run my freezer and sump pump." And I run this 130-foot extension cords, plural, across the street and plug it through my front door, going down into the basement and plugging into the sump pump and into my refrigerator to keep it going. And there was enough voltage there, even after 100 feet of 12 gauge cables, that I was able to run those without a problem. Yeah. Sump pumps are the real killer, because when a sump pump kicks in, especially if you're running something like a 1/2 or 3/4 horsepower sump pump, those suckers do pull 12 amps. So that's 1,200 watts right there. It's something more than a typical UPS is going to give you. So you better have a generator that can handle the starting surge of a sump pump.
Yeah, if my power is out for more than a day, I go to somewhere else.
Well, if you can afford to do that, yes, I know that.
Yeah,
so that's the one thing. If you have a major outage or major damage in an area, because even the natural gas can be affected as well.
Well, my sister has a generator. She has one of those. I forget what it's called, but they have natural gas pumped into their house, through the street. And the last time we had a hurricane, the electricity on the street that he lives in was out for 4 or 5 days or more.
Mm-hmm.
His generator was running fine the whole time. They were doing they had about 10, 12 people in the house, and they were doing laundry and using the oven, and
Wow. Big generator.
Yeah, it's a powerful generator. It's a 25, I think it was 20.
Yeah, 25 kilowatt. Yes.
25 kilowatts.
Yeah. If you want to run an oven, you're going to need to have a lot. Same thing with an air conditioner.
Yeah, it was running the air conditioning. The washer and dryer were going. People were cooking stuff. The refrigerators were on. It handled everything. It was wonderful.
I do know that there are some portable generators that you can get that have 3 different modes of operation. They have gasoline, natural gas, or propane. They get the most power out of propane. They get the least amount of power over natural gas because there's less energy in natural gas versus propane or gasoline.
Yeah.
So they derate the amount that it can produce. Some of them, however, do have issues with this waveform that they generate, and it's not always the best thing for electrical devices. So the best kind of generator you can get is also the most expensive, and it's called an inverter generator. An inverter generator makes sure that you're delivering nothing but a pure sine wave to your devices. And that's what your electronics is expecting to have. It's probably why my UPS is complaining when I plug it into my old Coleman generator, and it's running and it blips a little bit when the sump pump kicks on and they go beep, 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 beep. Yes, I hear you. Okay. All right. We've talked about generators. Anybody else got something they wish to talk about? Wayne, you're pretty quiet today.
Yeah, I don't really have too much right now.
Well, I'm glad everything is working. You had some issues before with one of your machines trying to access Zoom. I guess that's gone away.
I've been using Brave instead of Firefox, and I don't seem to have those problems. The problem I have with Firefox, when I go to try to log on, it says it won't accept it. So I quit using Firefox for the time being. There's something about it, it doesn't like security, some sort of security issue.
It could be one of the DNS issues that has plagued them in the past.
So you're double clicking on the link, which opens up a web browser, and then that opens up Zoom.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I use the browser, to read my email and then click on the how to get to Zoom.
Right.
And I don't have that problem with Brave. I've had that. I have a problem with Firefox when I try to log into my Comcast email. It doesn't like it.
Yeah. I have synchronization turned on between my Google Calendar and Zoom. And what I do is I add the Zoom meeting link into my Google Calendar. And within a few seconds, the Zoom calendar has it in my app. So I just launch the Zoom app itself. I don't go into a web browser.
Okay.
I launch the Zoom app itself, and right in front of me will be the meeting for today. And I just click join, and it joins.
Oh, that might be a way around.
And you don't have to give Zoom if you use Google for your personal calendar, like I do. I have an extra Google account that I use for testing. So, and you can create multiple calendars. There's another way. Even if you only have one Gmail account, you're allowed to create a second and third calendar, and you can give Zoom access to its own calendar, essentially, not the one that you use, so that if anything goes wrong, it can't see any of your personal appointments.
Oh, that's nice. Something I've not played with.
I do all my appointments on my iPhone, so that's what my calendar is.
Fortunately, the Zoom program only supports Google and Microsoft.
Yeah,
Well,
the Firefox issues with anything that browser is doing with remote meetings have to do with Firefox having permission to access your webcam and your microphone. And also screen sharing. Those are three things where Firefox, being an application, not a system component, doesn't have the kind of access that the Chromium-based browsers have, including Edge.
Okay. Interesting.
Yep.
And again, there is also a difference in how it handles DNS.
Well, I can actually just open up Zoom and plug in the coding that's in the email, and I think that sometimes works.
Yes, you can punch in the meeting ID, copy and paste the
Right.
meeting ID and passcode.
Yeah, the Zoom app usually will work because it uses system level access and permissions. And it uses whatever DNS the system is using.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for example, if I have a reoccurring meeting, that I have reoccurring meetings that use the same meeting link every time. And so I have in my Google Calendar a reoccurring meeting that says once a month on the first Monday, create a meeting at 7:00. And this is the meeting link for the Zoom. And it just replicates it once a month in my calendar for me. And I never have to touch, anything ever again. The only time I have to add it to my calendar is for meetings where they change the link every month.
I don't know if we're changing our link every month or not. I have to see how many times. Usually it's only when I change the number of meetings that it's good for, and then it will sometimes change the link. But I usually set up 8 to 10 meetings in advance.
Yeah, recently one of our other meeting hosts neglected to reset the number of meetings and when they would expire. That led to some interesting issues with getting in.
Yeah, I tried the meeting ID, it didn't work. Nobody's there.
No. What it said was, welcome to the May meeting, and this was June. Welcome to the May meeting, and it did say the host had already joined.
I lied.
No, the host had started the meeting, and it was just simply listing itself as the May meeting because of how many meetings had been registered.
Okay, yeah.
So that had to be fixed. So yeah, this happens, Ed. It doesn't just happen to you.
Okay, good. I thought it was just something that, guess what? I forgot to make more meetings. Go in there, and sometimes I catch it right before it's going to expire. It's like, okay, let's just crank up the number. And that's usually good enough. So fun and games with Zoom. What's your alternative? I mean, it could be YouTube Live. It could be something like that. We do that for our church as well. And we're able to run both the YouTube Live and the Zoom at the same time. But if you're doing YouTube Live, there's no back and forth banter. It's all one direction.
Correct.
Right.
YouTube Live streaming also works with Jitsi Meet, which is open source, and its cousin BlueJeans.
Oh, never heard of those before.
Those are preferred by one of the groups that I meet with remotely because they are open source people and they don't want to use something that isn't.
Right. And Jitsi Meet is open source and it works in a browser. There's no app.
Right.
And it works across, I know Linux groups that use Jitsi Meet because they want to use open source that runs on Linux. And
yep. The main problem, however, is especially in Linux, Firefox is different from Chromium in its APIs. And so this can lead to issues with screen sharing and with audio and camera access. Linux is really big on permissions anyway.
Yep. A little more security conscious.
Well, security conscious in some ways.
Okay. And what was the other one? You said
What
Jitsi meat? And
Jitsi meat, and it has a cousin which may or may not still exist called Blue Jeans.
Mhm.
That actually may be older than
Okay.
Jitsi.
Yeah, that blue jeans was what the color computer group that I belonged to was using.
Hmm.
Wow.
And also, these open source ones can be self-hosted, or they can be hosted by a company's server,
Okay.
or just a community server. It's kind of like these so-called federated social platforms, like Mastodon.
Okay.
And having your meeting limited to a 1 hour, Proton has a new free meeting app that gives you up to 100 participants, but it's restricted to 60 minutes.
Ah, yeah. Sometimes that we go beyond that. So we've gone way beyond that on occasion. Not always, but depends on who's here and who's talking. Yes.
I've used the Proton Meet for 2 of our month's meetings, and I've been able to go way over an hour. But somebody said it might be like Zoom in the beginning. It's not so busy yet, so
Yeah.
they're being lenient and letting you go. Um, but it's worked pretty well. But we always have 2 links set up so that if the get kicked out of one, we just jump to the other.
Yeah, you can't do that with Zoom anymore. It's been much more belligerent if you have the private Zoom and you want to go over the 40-minute restriction. It won't let you restart it immediately. You have to wait 10 minutes before you can restart it.
Yeah, we just
Right.
tell everybody to go to the bathroom and then come back.
And if you have the Proton one, you can create multiple meetings, and it doesn't stop you from switching from one to the other.
Yeah.
Because we've gone beyond an hour today.
Oh, yeah. Well, we pay for the Zoom, so the Zoom will definitely let us go as far as we needed to. But this is not Proton.
No.
But the thing is that the Zoom interface and what you can do as a meeting host, if you're running large scale meetings like John does for AppCug, none of the other meeting programs, whether it be Google Meet or Jitsi Meet or Proton or whatever, it doesn't have the rich sophistication that Zoom has.
Yes. Well, Zoom has been playing with this for a bit longer. They also seem to be a little bit more bandwidth efficient because they really cut down on the resolution of video that's recorded. They because I noticed how big the video is after we've been on for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and it's considerably smaller than even 720 recording. I would say it's probably like a 440 in terms of the actual band. But the downside is the captions that are captured for Zoom are not the ones that are compatible with something like Handbrake if you want to embed the captions into the video after the effect. So you either have to convert the captions to what Handbrake wants, or you have to do some other mechanism to get the captions included using something like one of the Videoland products will be able to do that. But I always had problem whenever I'm trying to downsize the resolution and the captions and make sure everything plays. It usually changes the aspect ratio. I haven't found the right secret to say lock the aspect ratio, keep it the same size. Not quite there. At some point, I
Now,
will.
with Zoom, you can record to the cloud or record to your local drive. If you record to the local drive, do you get the higher resolution?
I think it does, but I have not done it to my local drive lately because it still re-renders it after you've finished, and it takes about as long as the meeting was to re-render. Because it's not immediately ready when you finish the meeting. It says, I'm still processing your meeting. But I would do that in the past. I probably have. I don't know on this machine if I got an old Zoom recording that I saved on here or not. Let's see if I got any. All right. Let's go back here. Yeah, so back in September, I recorded to the hard drive. Let's see if it'll tell me anything about it. It was 1920 by 1200 is what it recorded. So it did record a higher resolution. But I don't know if that's the same today. So I have not recorded from to the computer as opposed to the cloud. Right now we're doing the cloud recording so that Sanford can pull it down when he needs to for if for some reason Tim's copy didn't work.
Yeah. With Jitsi meetings that are live streamed to YouTube, you have the ability to record right there. And it records at whatever YouTube resolution is.
And YouTube resolution is definitely higher resolution. Of course, YouTube storage still doesn't cost you anything, but at some point in time, I know that somebody's going to be knocking on the door saying, hey, you want to keep all those YouTube videos you made? Yeah, first cross my palm with some coin.
Well, it's not like you can't download after they're created.
You can download them after they're created, true, but I look at what we used to do for when we did all of our stuff at church and Zoom, and we ended up with a minimal Dropbox account with like 2 terabytes. And we probably had like 40 or 50 gigabytes worth of videos that we had recorded that were still out in the Dropbox because they'll stay there until they get retired. But that was a convenient way of pulling it out of the 10 gigabyte limit of Zoom, putting it into Dropbox, and then you're not worrying about it for a while. I think the Zoom storage, if you want to increase Zoom storage, it's a lot more expensive than if you have a Dropbox account. But then when you do the Dropbox, you got to do the Dropbox plus the caption file. And then if somebody's just playing it from a link, I don't know if they get the caption file. Yes, high-class problems. Fun and games with video files. Has anybody done a lot of stuff with Zoom files at all?
I haven't done anything. I don't have a Zoom premium account to do it with.
Yeah, but if you recorded on a Zoom private account, you could do it. But if you ever had to try and add captions back in and embed them into a video or something like that?
No.
Okay.
I very rarely ever screen record, and if I do, I either use a program called Snagit, which I have a license for,
yeah,
or OBS Studio.
Well, that's my OBS Studio is the one thing that I do rely on when I've had to. Somebody gives me a YouTube video that they want to show, and of course they don't have the rights to show it, or it's even if they created it themselves, they keep sending me a link to it. And we don't want to take the chance of trying to use a link and download at the same time we're uploading on our link. So we usually like to have a local copy. So what I've typically done is fire up OBS Studio and record the output of my browser as I'm going through those links. So if it's a ×1 record, of course, okay, so you got to watch the whole thing while it's going by, but OBS Studio will copy it, put it on your hard drive for you, and now you can do whatever you want with it.
Well,
So,
are you talking YouTube videos?
yeah, YouTube videos that don't allow the download because you don't have YouTube Premium.
Oh, then you just use a third-party tool to download them.
They keep going out of fashion, if you've noticed. The third-party tools that will save a YouTube video don't always work. Usually they'll work for a while and then they stop working, and then there's a notice that says we can no longer are in business because YouTube went after us.
Yeah.
But so far, if I can play it and I have OBS Studio and it captures my screen buffer and puts it into a file, it works.
Yeah,
I do know of at least 2 YouTube download utilities. One is Windows and one is Linux, which do seem to be kept up to date as of now. And they can do most YouTube videos, but not all of the premium ones.
Yeah. I use a program that I get from GitHub called YT Download. And it's available.
I've used YT Download too, and sometimes it works. Sometimes when you need it most, it's not there. Or it goes to you go to download it and there's nothing in the file, or it stops exactly at 10 megabytes. Yeah, I've seen that.
I've heard people talk nicely about a program called 4K Downloader.
And I've tried 4K Downloader as well, and sometimes that worked for me. And it was more resolution than I needed. I was just trying to download some of these supposed YouTube videos that the preschool said, oh, but these are public domain. And unfortunately, they're public domain for you to watch on YouTube. However, if you were to use them in your own video presentation, you would definitely get a strike against your login because it uses copyrighted music.
Yeah. 4K Video Downloader Plus is maintained, and it probably has the greatest range of capabilities of downloading of any of the downloaders I've seen. At one time, there were some Linux distros that couldn't run it because of a dependency issue, but that got resolved recently.
Okay. Well, I'll put it on my list to try next time I have to do this.
And here's the trick, is that YouTube is starting to share the third-party downloaders to verify that they're not a bot by logging into YouTube. And some of the YouTube downloaders don't have the option for you to authenticate to YouTube with a valid Google ID. The ones that do continue to work properly.
Yeah, I believe that's not a problem with 4K Video Downloader Plus.
Okay.
But they also do have a premium version with more features.
Yeah.
Well, I know that whenever we are playing one of these videos, what we will do is we will mute or severely diminish the audio volume, and hopefully that does not trigger any. So far, we haven't had any strikes against us. We've had some copyright notices, but not an official strike because they use AI to recognize the audio tracks and say, "Oh, this might be possibly copyrighted." So. But so far, like I said, no strikes so far, and I'm just knock on wood right now. Don't get a strike against it. But one of the issues of using a YouTube type of, the people that are creating these things with copyrighted music, what would happen to them is if they try to monetize their YouTube video because they've used copyrighted material, any monetary amounts they have collected will go to the copyright holder instead. And that's what I've discovered with using copyrighted material on YouTube without the appropriate Open CLI or CCLI license. Yeah. Dennis, you're really quiet tonight. Hands up. Are you done with accounting for the year? Well, normally you fire up your machine, so this is the accounting time of year, and you've had to use it, and then you put it away for the next year.
No, I haven't. I haven't gotten that done yet.
Yeah, great fun. I have had an opportunity to use ChatGPT recently to create a letter that I'm going to send back to our friends at the Internal Revenue Service, asking them to decline to capture the penalty that associated back in 2020. I think we did all of our 941s and everything was done correctly. However, in 2024, the IRS sent us a penalty notice because they stopped sending anything out during COVID. And all of a sudden in 2024, February, they started sending these things out again. And here's a penalty for not filing 941 returns on time. And they were given copies of our W-2s and the 941s and all this stuff because we don't normally file a tax form. We just file the 941s, and that's pretty much it. And they were able to say, okay, you're good, but we're still going to keep the penalties in force because we don't know that you actually paid on time or something to that effect. So I've gone through all of my old bank statements on that account for the church and got all of the electronic codes for each one of these transfers and put it into a spreadsheet from the statements. So I have everything and it matches to the penny what we paid. So I'm thinking of sending that to them along with some more documentation. And then I had ChatGPT at least frame up the start of a letter to them so that we could maybe be more successful. So we'll see whether or not AI can actually go to bat for you with the IRS.
Anything works is good.
Yeah, if it doesn't work, then I get our two senators involved, our lame duck senator and our the other one that's there, and let them go after the IRS for us.
Hey,
Because they've already said you've done no wrong, but we're still going to keep the penalties, and they're still looking for about 42K. And I'm not ready to give them that just because they want it.
All you have to do is be like Trump.
Yeah. Threaten a lawsuit. You disclose my information.
wow.
Yeah.
40,000? Ooh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, it was like the year's worth of W-2, the 941 filings. And then I'm not sure. Like I said, at first I thought it was because of one of the COVID loans that was forgiven, and maybe they didn't forgive it and they thought we owed taxes on it, but it wasn't that at all. It was all these stupid 941s. We have a preschool along with our church, so there's more people involved.
Well, I don't know, isn't it?
Anyhow, I'll see how that goes. I've created the letter. I sent it to a couple people for their critique, and neither one of them has gotten back to me on it yet. So
I might try an offer and compromise and sell for a lower amount or whatever.
Well, we had an accountant that went and he solved the problem, basically got them to say, you don't owe the, you are forgiven for, you did the filing. So they found everything. They said, here it all is, but they still wanted to hold on to the penalty. So before I give them a dime, I'm going to try this. And then the second thing I'll try is the senators, because the senators usually have more weight than a congressman. So regular congressmen, local
this is for
representatives.
a church too, so it's
Yes, yeah, especially for a small church, and I'll just say, hey, we have no money, and you can put a lien on our place, but we can't sell the church anyway because the United Methodist Church won't let us sell it. So,
well, usually the IRS is quick to waive penalties. I mean, because it's juice on top of the what's the tax that's really owed. So
yeah, there's no tax involved. They shouldn't be getting anything.
how's the church history with the IRS?
Pretty good. I mean, it's not like we
I mean,
had an issue trying to go to online filing with 941 because the person who had signed up had some medical issues, and we couldn't get her login to work with our church computer, so we were delayed going online for filing.
Well, they kind of look at your history, and if you've been a bad boy,
No, we don't have any other penalties we've ever paid. So,
well, that's good. Yeah, I asked her, tell me, hey, we're a church, and
well, the Chat GPT put all those words in there for me very nicely.
We'd like to, this year, we're a church, and just beg a little bit,
Yeah, we don't have the money in our budget, even if we could pay it. So, yes.
Well then, well, that's where the offering compromise comes in. You can kind of, hey, look, you're not going to get any money anyway, so
Yeah.
we'll pay you 5,000 and make this go away.
I'd prefer to give them $5.
Well,
They won't do it for that.
they don't do anything for less than 5,000, because they got to pay for the agents and their time. So, whatever, if they come after you, they're gonna, they got to get something for their agents spending their time on it.
Well, I don't know how much time they actually spend on it. For the longest time, every 60 days, you got a letter from them saying, we're working on it, we're working on it, we're working on it, And that was like multiple 60-day windows before we even got a response back on this. So, and it kept changing the location that we had to send a response to. First, it was Kansas City, then it was Ohio. Yes.
Well, every year they changed, they have who's doing what. Yeah.
And there's less people there to do anything. So,
well, they're all government employees too.
I know, but there's less government employees involved, so now it's harder to get hold of them. Yes.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
And every time you got somebody new looking at the file, yeah.
Well, we'll see what happens. I'll try that, and hopefully it'll work.
Well, try and offer something. My see is offer them something and make this go away.
Well, before I do that, I have to get authorization because I don't have the 5,000 to offer them. And I'm sure that they're not going to settle for something less, but we'll see. I'll try the letter first. And if the letter doesn't work, then I go ahead and call the two senators up and say, hey, Tammy, Dick, can you do something for us?
Well, hey, we give it a try, If it works, you go for it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else got something else they wish to share tonight? Everybody else's updates seem to work okay.
You want to talk about Intel with all the new, with Apple and all the. I guess they're trying to get the chips out of Taiwan or whatever for the Chinese come in, I guess.
Well, good luck with them trying to do that because you don't move a fab that easily.
Well, I mean, why? That's what it looks like.
They want to do that
here before the Chinese come in, and then everything will get tough. Yeah.
Well, some of those chips are being made in mainland too for a while.
Oh, like Tesla. Yeah.
Well, other chips too. I mean, there's people that have had stuff manufactured. I mean, a lot of the stuff you look at that comes through, I mean, some of those were originally U.S. manufactured chips, and now they're coming from a Chinese fab and from the mainland. So, yep, they're making them too. Maybe not the latest and greatest. They don't have any of the NVIDIA stuff to speak of, but yeah, I know the most recent, they're finally getting around to doing some of the updates for the secure boot and the certificates that needed to be updated. Hopefully you've got everything applied before the end of this month.
Well, if by any chance you don't have the certificate, go into your BIOS, turn off secure boot, and it'll boot up.
Yeah.
But there is also a situation where, especially if you upgraded to 11 from a 7, 8, or 10, and they were originally had a UEFI partition, that 32 of between 1 and 200, that won't work right now. You got to have at least 500 megabyte UEFI partition. So some people are getting a update like May or June that are not going in for that reason. And then you have to know how to use a partitioning tool to rearrange things and enlarge that partition. Well, the vast majority of users out there have no clue what a partitioner is, let alone how to use it and how to rearrange your partitions. Supposedly, on one problem, Microsoft for the May update, some people had a different problem, and they found a way of being able to correct that problem for them, but they cannot change the UEFI that I know of, because you have to be able to move partitions and resize things to be able to get that to work correctly, which is something I do a lot of regardless of this particular situation. But right now I have one machine that's in that mode for the June update. And what I have to do is go in with a partitioner and rearrange everything in order to be able to get that June update to actually go in.
Is that the recovery partition you're referring to?
No, that's UEFI partition. Usually partition number 1, that's
yeah, I have it listed as an EFI partition.
Well, EFI is what Linux people use, but usually in Windows it calls it UEFI.
Well, I'm looking at my version in computer management, and it says EFI. It says healthy EFI system partition is what it's.
It's the same thing. It's
okay.
Identical.
It's sometimes
well,
called.
Mine's only 260, and I haven't noticed any issues.
Well, then you're lucky in it. But people, I have the one machine. It has an old 100 megabyte, and it ain't going to go. And the current recommendation, if you were doing a clean install, is 500 megabytes.
Yeah, that's also called the EFI boot partition.
Yeah. Boot.
So
yeah, it is different from the recovery partition, which has had its own problems.
Yeah, that's another one. Last year, the recovery partition was too small. Suddenly, they needed an increase in the size of the recovery partition from about 700 megabytes to around 850 megabytes. And so that caused a problem as well in 2025. So now we got two situations in back-to-back years where old setups were still being used, and the only way around it is to know how to use a partition tool and how to move partitions and resize partitions properly. And you're talking maybe 1 to 2% of all computer users might have the knowledge. What are the other 98% of the people doing?
Yeah.
Now,
Well,
if you get a brand new machine, odds are that you're not going to run into either one of the problems because they would have probably been already sized correctly anyhow. But not everybody goes out and buys a new machine every year or two. A lot of people have to hang on to what they can afford and see what the hell happens.
Well, if you want to check what your current settings are, you can go into your your settings, privacy and security, Windows security, and then click on device security and look at the secure boot section on there. And if it's got a green check mark, you got the right certificates, you're good to go.
It's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
You can actually update your certificates, and for about 2 or 3 reboots, and there are certain other things that have to happen, it still won't register that you've got the new ones.
And normally, if you are not already updated properly, you get a larger text message saying that you've got a problem still.
Yeah.
And they now also have a way for Linux people to be able to update the security as well, and also to be able to do your BIOS if you need to update them. Because Windows in 11 at least, on a business class machine, will keep your drivers and BIOS and other firmware all up to date.
I still have a Lenovo license, and they periodically, even though I don't have Windows updates scheduled, it'll do some of the driver updates or the BIOS updates and not listen to the fact that I've said postpone updates.
Right.
Yeah, my Framelink 13 laptop, I just got the second package in 2 months of BIOS and driver updates. The
Right.
BIOS, I have a feeling, does have to do with secure boot. And the Windows drivers, it's just because there's new drivers. And the trouble is, they have a unified package for the drivers. 18 different drivers in one package. And the problem is, that package it just opens a command window, and then it tries to install things silently in the background, so you don't know how far it's gotten. And it will hang if a reboot is required. And it'll tell you not to reboot until all 18 go through, which will never happen. So their idea of driver update bundles leaves something to be desired. This is a beta package, and it comes direct from Taiwan. So I guess they expect you know a thing or two.
Well, I'm fortunate. No updates are required for me. So I just did a quick check. I was afraid that, I should have clicked on this to go check because that'll be the next thing. Okay, we're installing your updates. Reboot now. Reboot in the next 10 seconds.
Yeah. For this one package, I ended up rebooting, I think 3 times, and each time it would get a little farther and a little farther, and I knew by the second reboot what was happening, but it was not explained in the process. The BIOS was just fine. That update was just run the executable, it goes back into the BIOS, it runs a little gear wheel because that's the framework logo, and it puts little dots down as though the gear were pooping. And when it finishes its line, it's done.
That's sort of like checking your hard drive, your SSD for errors or something like that, and you're just watching this thing going across the screen, and then every once in a while, one of those green dots turns red. Like, oh, okay, I have some holes here.
Memtest is like that. Memtest is like that.
Yeah.
And I did have to run Memtest on some RAM in my tower because, unfortunately, part of the RAM was in contact with the heatsink from the CPU fan.
Ooh.
And so one little area got overheated. So I
Did
got
it
some.
actually go bad and stay bad, or is it
Yes.
only transit? Oh, wow.
Yes, Windows first noticed it as a transient, and then it became constant. And Memtest consistently did fail it
Oh, it's
after
not
that
covered
point.
under the warranty by any chance, is it?
I know that particular RAM, because it was an assemble yourself kit kind of situation. No, that wouldn't be. But what I did was I replaced the RAM with some Corsair RAM that had a much nicer heat sink on the RAM. And I made sure that I got as much space as possible between that and the heatsink. But it's a bad design. But in any event, as far as drivers and BIOS updates go, they're not usually very difficult. If I'm using the AMD tool or the Intel tool or anything like that on drivers, I know what's going on throughout the whole process, and it works just fine. It's
So
just
you're
this.
aware of when things don't quite work. Okay, now it needs the AMD app to be updated as well as the firmware, so the two talk to each other.
Well, the app updates almost constantly anyway, and the AMD app does its own updating, but anything else I can do through UniGet UI or any of these others where you update everything all at once. So it's not really that big a deal. It doesn't
For
take
the,
up a whole lot of my time any longer.
yeah, for the longest time, I used to have my Blink devices. I have a USB on one of my Blink hubs, and it would just happily save clips and not even say anything. But for the last week, it's complained a couple times about the Blink, about the clip update failing. And it's right about the same time every time they push a new update. It's like they pushed an update and then they pushed an update a couple days later. So not sure what they're busy doing, what didn't work or what they're playing with, but they're pushing out updates. So if you have Blink devices, be prepared for some update frenzy. Yes. I'm looking at them right now. Two of them with their little blinky lights. I mean, the hubs are necessary because the way Blink cameras communicate with the battery operated Blink cameras do not communicate over Wi-Fi. They communicate over, I think it's like 900 megahertz or something in that area. And then they transmit the information to the hub, and the hub is the thing that connects to Wi-Fi. So they're perfectly happy to run until they run out of battery, and then you got to replace the batteries.
Yeah.
But it's a different scenario with my Wi-Fi connected bird buddies, because I got two of them now. I got one for a hummingbird feeder and one for a regular feeder that I was given for a Father's Day gift years ago. And they go to sleep at night, so they don't need to use their battery at all. That saves their battery overnight. But I've noticed the hummingbird with full sun on its solar panel almost always is in the 90 to 95%, whereas the other one underneath the tree, well, it goes down and I have to recharge it about once every 3 weeks. Bring it out, plug it in, charge it up, send it back out again. But it's
Has anybody ever been to a data center or any comments?
used to live in one.
I was going to say, what are they like, and what's your comments or whatever? Those data centers that they're all building all over the place.
Usually they're not allowing people to come visit them unless you work in one. And if you work in one, you're going to be cold all the time because it's kept at about 65 degrees. Okay. And there's this whirring of fans from all the server racks. So yeah, you can, we had our own server room at Motorola when I was working there, and it had a cellular telephone switch in there as along with all of the server racks that we had for the routers, for the tandem computers that were in there, for all the stuff we had. And it was a din. You go in there and you work for a while and you come out and almost need some sort of hearing protection when you're in there. And you would always come out cold, and you're not allowed to bring coffee in there, although I would.
Well, most people that have been interviewed on television news are saying that if they live close to a data center, they have increased cost of local water. They have besides electricity. And then there's extra noise from the fans and the generators when they run those. And when the generators run, quite often there's a ground vibration that you have to tolerate.
Yeah. And my local Illinois state senator in my district has brought forth a bill to the Illinois Senate to prohibit data centers from being deployed within 3 miles of residential areas. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, there was also some guy, I can't remember a name and what he was about, but he wanted to build in the Salt Lake area, the biggest data center in the nation, and he's already had to cut back, and he still has massive resistance against the data center, period.
Yeah. Well, that they don't exactly reuse their water the same way you would have something like a nuclear power plant would. When they build a nuclear power plant and they need cooling water, they put a whole pond or a small lake there, and then they use the lake for the cooling, and that works out well when you're running a 4 megawatt reactor. Okay, well, got news for you, or gigawatt, whatever they're at. The data centers, they will bring in water, but then they flush it back into the system. So they are consumers of the water and aquifers in the area. So if you're on a well, you have to be concerned when there's a large commercial venture that's also using the same aquifer that you might be using.
And the farmers and cattle ranchers, etc., are also using the aquifers. And they're going to compete with the data centers too?
Well, I got news for them. The Agala aquifer is running out of water. That's that big one that goes all the way from Montana to Texas, Nebraska to Texas.
Well, they were using that for the farmers out there. They have those great big sprinklers that go around and pumping all the water out.
Yep.
That's where what happened.
Yeah, and some of them have run dry. I know when just in my area, there was a commercial development that was made. It was installed about 4 blocks away from me, east of me, and the residences that are east of me for the next 3 blocks were built there maybe 10 to 20 years in advance of when my house was built. So when they put their wells down, they probably went about 200 feet. And some of those had issues with their wells starting to run dry a little bit. So they had to either have them re-drilled deeper or another one next to it drilled deeper. The thing was, the development that went in had commercial water for its for the building use, but they used aquifer water for irrigating their lawns. So they put in their own wells and they were pumping water out of the aquifer for irrigation. So I don't know if they've put a kibosh on some of that nearby or not. I'm sort of lucky with mine. Mine was put in at 242 feet, and the last time we checked, the water table was at about 115. So it comes up 50 some odd or 90 feet up from where the entry of the well is, and my pump is at 175, I think. So hopefully it continues to pump water. I haven't had that problem, but knock on wood again. All right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. If you wanted, get a copy of the presentation in the chat. Okay. I had put it out there, so it still should be out there. And if you have any ideas for future meetings or such, you can just send me an email, edward.keating@outlook.com. Works fine. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good.
Good night.
Good meeting. Good night.
And good meeting. Very good. Thanks, Ed.
Sure.